these are such fruitful conversations,
Yep.
and they didn't start from like talking about making amazing change. We were just
Yep.
kind of talking about everyday things
Sure.
or traveling.
Totally.
And then it developed into, like them talking or us talking about Doctors Without Borders and
Sure.
all of the opportunities and how, starting a SLT with MedLife could then develop into them doing this kind of thing on a much deeper scale later in life.
Sure. Totally.
Yeah, social media has kind of
it almost gets in the way, but helps at the same time.
yeah.
Yeah.
You can't live with it. You can't
You're
live
right,
without
right,
it.
right, right, right. Well, I think that's like it's the weird part of MedLife is like there's a there's a way to think of like the SLT being the end of MedLife, but I think the reality is it's really the beginning for a whole lot of people. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of kids that come out of the SLT and they're like, wow, I think I want to do something different with my life, or I want to do this, or it really kind of exposes people to a totally different world, right?
Sure, and that's actually what I was saying to you. I think when we first met each other, was that's exactly what happened to me. I thought I wanted to go into business, or I thought I wanted to go into kind of the startup tech world.
Yeah.
And then I went to volunteer in Nepal.
Yeah.
And I realized I want to do something that helps people.
Yeah.
I in fact, I need to be around people. I need to be dedicating my life to something that's important, that actually matters.
Yeah. I mean, I think that a kid yesterday was asking me about like, where's the MedLife mission end? Like, is it optometry or is it this? Or kind of like, thinking in very like practical terms. And I think, I mean, basically at a really basic level, right? It's kind of just being like in Spanish, you say chispa or the spark, right? To kind of get people in a different direction in life, right? And so I tell folks all the time, I'm like, man, I don't care if you become a lawyer, a business person, sales, plastic surgeon, whatever. What if you just volunteered 2 days a month as a plastic surgeon in Manhattan instead of just doing like, cosmetic surgery or something? You know what I mean? Like, I think the tilt towards a better world isn't as drastic as we think, right? Like, it's not actually like everybody has to like become a priest and like vow poverty and vow like I'm never gonna get, you know what I mean? Like, it's actually just a slight tilt from where we are. Sure. It's saying like, I want to do business, I want to do sales, or in my case, I'm going to do emergency medicine. And so you just have this slight tilt towards how can I do that and serve people and have some purpose in my life. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
100%.
I think different than our parents' generation, like people want to have purpose. You know what I mean? Like, me personally, right? I think to myself, I've got 30, 40, 50 years left here. Like, you know what I mean? Like, okay, I don't want to be poor. Like you know what I mean? I'm not somebody that's just like, oh my God, the path in life is me being poor and me giving up everything. And there was a time I sort of thought that way. But,
right.
But I think it's just simply living the same life that you've always wanted with a sense of purpose.
100%. And actually, that's something that companies use as part of the recruitment process now. Right. It's actually rare to find a company that doesn't incorporate some sense of purpose into their recruitment process, because it's not attractive anymore to work for a company
for just money
where you don't have some kind of mission, or you don't have some kind of deeper purpose beyond earning a living.
I think it's totally true. Yeah. And I think we've talked about this with other people within MedLife, right? Like, coming out of like higher education in Peru and feeling like the almighty dollar was the only goal, and like we didn't really care about somebody's education and if they actually were successful, right? I think David was saying this, and like basically coming to MedLife because you get burnt out on just this ruthless capitalism type thing of just make money. We don't care about if you're actually doing anything good for the people you're serving,
Definitely, yeah.
Right? And like,
but at the same time, the other aspect is you do need money in order to function.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that struck me when I applied for MedLife. Was that it appeared to be very aware of the necessity of money and of funds. And I think what's interesting is like even the SLTs today, the volunteers that come, the trip leaders, the community, everybody is very aware that there is a clear trade-off between funds and development, and that we need these funds in order to be able to function.
Yes.
So you're not paying to kind of come on a trip, you're paying for that development
for the MedLife to be able to do work. Yes, right. Which is ultimately, I think, more and more, right? If I buy a product, I want to feel like at least a portion of the profits that are being used to do something positive in the world, right? Like, you don't want to think that somebody's in like some sweatshop making clothes and like suffering, and that's why I have the shirt that I have, right? You want to feel like that person's a little bit better off, right? And that's what I mean by like this slight tilt, right? We're not talking about like destroying everything that came before, and people can't make clothes in Peru for people in the United States. It's just doing it in a way that's ethical. It's doing it in a way that's like being a decent human being, right? And like just like, and I think that that's a very attractive thing, and especially for young people when they're trying to find their path, right? And that is, I think, more what MedLife is about than like becoming a doctor. And that's my hope, right? Like, I mean, I grew up in a town of maybe 40,000 people in Maine, right? There was not, as far as I'm aware, anyone that ever spoke Spanish in my high school, right? And yet now I'm living in Peru. My boys are born here. I'm married to a Peruvian woman, and that started with a 2-week trip to Costa Rica. Right? It really did. I went to Costa Rica to like learn how to speak Spanish better, and then that springboarded me into a semester in Panama, and that springboarded me to an entire year living in Ecuador, and that led to an internship in Peru, which led to me founding MedLife, and then all of a sudden my life cascades into, for me, what's this beautiful thing of like what I do now.
Yeah, I texted you the other day, and I hope it didn't sound too schmoozy, because I sent you that text, and then I realized, God, I sound like a real schmuck, but I was genuinely impressed, because I think there's loads of NGOs and there's loads of international development work, and I don't think any of it, or at least I don't think hardly any of it has a malicious intent.
Sure.
I think everybody's intentions start off really wanting to create change.
Sure.
But unfortunately, so many projects do end up either not working or creating more vulnerability, more disadvantage. And I think after seeing the SLTs, I was just genuinely impressed with how well MedLife functions. You know, even just picking up the doctors at the hospital, and in terms of the timing, like logistically, everything felt very smooth. So MedLife feels like a social organization, a social mission, but it's run with the professionalism of a private company.
And that I don't think that that's on accident.
You're like, I've kind of spent 20 years
really hard doing that, to be honest. But yeah, I mean, I think part of it, right? I will tell you, I mean, obviously I've been doing this for 20 years. I've got a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. Like, when you start getting married and you got kids, life gets really complicated, right? Like, really complicated. And like, so now you're trying to raise some kids and make sure that they get an education. And I think the reality for a lot of NGOs and a lot of people that do this kind of work is like, life gets in the way. Do you know what I mean? Like, yeah, sure, you can go spend a year, 2, 3 in Latin America, but it's pretty hard to spend 20. It's not that easy. It just isn't. You know what I mean? Like, how do you function? How do you like? And so like, I talk to students about like getting language, getting like culture, getting like these other things of just like practical life. And I think that's what MedLife has done, right? Like, people are really shocked to be like, wait, you don't have a big office in Manhattan? And I'm like, no, why do I need an office in Manhattan? I have an office in Lima, Peru. Right? Like, there are capable people in Lima, Peru. That's how we run, And like, it's like a shock to people, right? And
I did have this thought the other day when I had just done a day in the field, and even just as an observer, I didn't really have that much to do. I was pretty knackered at the end of the day, and I thought, how is Nick still got his practice in Texas, I think you said, and then running MedLife with a family, and all of the different stuff, all of the different things going on. I guess I was like, some people are just made differently. Yeah, I don't know,
man. I mean, maybe I'm made differently. I don't know. I mean, I enjoy the work that I do. I don't know. I am pretty acutely aware that I only have one life to live. You know what I mean? And like, and to me, like, me just kind of hitting my dopamine hits constantly, like whether that's Instagram, like that doesn't to me feel like a fulfilled life.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And so I think I'm just very acutely aware of that. Like I've got one life to live, and like, you know, just me going to restaurants or something is not really a fulfilled life to me. And like, I want to have something of meaning and purpose, and, you know, something when I look back as an old man, then I'm like, that had meaning and purpose, you know?
Yeah.
And so I'm pretty committed to that idea.
Yeah.
And I fear kind of the mundane life more than I do the craziness of this life, if that makes sense. Like I fear going to a 9-to-5 and not having purpose and just trying to pay bills and just survive and becoming an old man. I fear that way more than I fear the craziness of my life now. The craziness I'll deal with, the hard work I'll deal with. I'll do the hard work, but I want to feel like it has some sense of meaning.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
I think, to be honest, this is something my wife and I talk about a fair bit. Like, I mean, I think all of us can suffer through any hardship if you feel like there's real purpose to it. Right?
Definitely.
The hard part is suffering when it's miserable suffering and you don't want to do it. Like, you're like, why am I doing this? So somebody can get rich, like, and it feels empty, right? Yeah. And then all of a sudden that suffering is like isolated suffering in the middle of the cold, and like, what am I doing with this one life that I have?
Yeah.
And, you know what I mean?
There's actually a great book that that talks about this a lot, and it's all about choosing your suffering. Yes. And it says that you have to make a choice on something. You have to choose something, and that even choosing to do nothing is still choosing to do, something, because you've chosen to do nothing.
Totally.
And then you have to deal with the consequences of that.
Yeah.
And he said that if you choose your suffering, then, as you say, it becomes enjoyable.
Yep.
But if you're constantly trying to escape from the realities of life, then that suffering thrusts itself upon you.
Yes.
And I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And something that I kind of wrote in my journal today, or a week ago for this year, when I said, okay, I'm coming to Peru, I'm starting this new job, I said kind of, I don't know what it will mean, I don't know how it will go, but I know that I want to lean into it. I don't want to live this year and also my life half-baked.
Totally, man.
You know, I don't want to, because I think, living something half-baked just doesn't feel very good.
Yeah. And you only got one. And you're going to go through it half-baked, and like, and then what? Right? Yeah. Like, go all out, right? Like, whatever that all out is, go. And I think for most of us, it's some level of human connection. It's some level of purpose, you know? And I think a little bit the unfortunate thing with MedLife is like, we called it MedLife, right? And so like the name comes off as this very medical oriented thing. And as a physician, like that's sort of my sweet spot and my strength, right? But man, I really don't feel that it has to be medicine, right? Like I hope, and I was attracted to when we had the conversation, and you're like, I was interested in sales and this and stuff, but I want to have purpose. I'm like, man, MedLife is for this guy. I really believe all the things that you do in life, right? Everything. This happens to me all the time. Students will be like, so what do people have for diseases in Peru? Do they have HIV, TB, and malaria, right? And so in like in the industrialized world, you're like, everybody has an infectious disease in like developing countries. And I'm like, they have everything we have. They're people. Like, they have diabetes, they have high blood pressure, they're overweight, they eat too much sweets, like, and there's cancer, and there's this, and yes, there is tuberculosis, HIV, malaria, those things exist, sure, but like, they're just people, you know what I mean? And like, it's not, you know, and again, so I think it's just a slight tilt, man. You can do sales and have sales and purpose and make a better world. You can make garments and make a better world, or you can be a physician and make the world a terrible place. I've seen it all the time. Like people that aren't compassionate or burnt out or whatever and just need a break, you know? And like, I don't think it's what you do. It's like the intention that you do it with.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And that's really my hope for young people is like, if we can, imagine if we could just like, you know, in terms of scaling, have 1 million people come through and realize that they want to have a life of purpose, whether that's becoming a lawyer, a surgeon, sales, whatever it is, marketing, social media, content creation, whatever, but just have a slight bend towards making the world better.
Mm-hmm.
What would things look like? You know what I mean?
Yeah. So you see MedLife as the trigger for that kind of?
I mean, to be honest, I feel like that's my life. And MedLife is just a vehicle that I use to like try and communicate that message for other people. And that's just what I'm trying to do, to be honest. There's a risk there of sounding almost preachy. I'm not trying to convince people to do anything that they don't want to do. I'm just trying to live my life in the way that I felt like gave me the purpose that I wanted to have in my life.
Mm.
And what I've seen over many years is that is attractive to a lot of people. Like a lot of people work in sales and tech and they're like, this sucks. Like, what am I doing with my life? And it's not the sales, it's the lack of purpose, right? It's the lack of making a difference. It's the lack of humanity in the process, right? I've seen a lot of physicians that like wanted to help the world and become physicians and are totally burnt out on the other end. I mean, totally burnt out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it's really not, what you do. It's just doing whatever you are passionate about or whatever skill set you have and having some purpose and having some commitment to making the world a better place. And I think that will make your life better. It may lead to some element of suffering, like you said, right? Like on Monday night, I got to get on a red-eye flight and then I'm working a bunch of nights in the ED. Like there is an element of that that is painful.
That
right?
sucks.
That sucks. It just straight up sucks, right? But to be honest, if I lived in Austin, Texas, or San Francisco, the same reality could happen and I wouldn't have the sense of purpose.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So again, it's not like the ER thing. It's just like how you apply what you're doing. Does it have purpose to your life or not? Right?
Yeah. It's like getting involved in your own life.
Yes. Yeah. And like having some say and some control and like the world doesn't have to be, I mean, pardon my language, but like just a big shithole. Like it doesn't have to be a terrible place. Like you can go out and I'm not, talking about the world is probably the wrong way to do it because it somehow makes it so much bigger than it is, right? You can take an active part of your community and make that community better.
Yeah.
Right? I just chose Lima, Peru as one of the communities that I'm going to put energy into, right? And so the energy I'm putting in is building some staircases. It's building retention walls. It's eventually building a school. It's building some people some homes. It's providing medical care, right?
Yeah.
That feels good to me. It feels like the world's better. I feel better. I feel like I'm leaving the world a better place for my kids. Like it's just the life that I want to live.
I think that the opposite as well of not doing that, the opposite of not getting involved is that you quickly feel like you're not in the driving seat, that life is happening to you.
Yeah. And you feel isolated and kind of alone and you're just like, what am I doing? Like I've got money in the bank and I don't know what it even means or what the purpose of this is. And I think we're getting super philosophical here, right? But like at some level, like you think about all the folks that are just like on like the digital, like social media stuff and feel isolated and feel depressed and feel anxious. And like the real solution is putting that down and doing what we're talking about doing, right? Is like go out and make purpose in your life. You know what I mean? And I think that in some way, I tell people this all the time and I don't think that they believe me. Like all the same dynamics that you see in MedLife, whether it's what we're talking about and changing your life and like how you view your life or how you serve people and listening to people and really trying to have that relationship that we have with people that we serve, one of service, right? And not just taking, but actual service, right? Not my ego, not me, right? Which I think there's some undercurrents that often happen there. But like when you come on a week-long thing like this, it kind of breaks you out of a habit, right? And so a lot of people will say stuff like, oh, like what am I going to do in a week? Like it's not even worth it. Like that's volunteerism, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay, cool. With you, volunteerism, not really worth it. Let's not go down that path. But like, what's the thing that like gets you out of the life that you're living right now? Like, how do you get out of it? What is the thing that kind of gives you the activation energy to be like, holy crap, like I have nothing of meaning and I need to change this, right?
Yeah, 100%. And there was a moment today in the field, in the SLT where I I was just talking to a woman and her baby, and her baby, who she was holding, came up and kind of held my finger, and I was just, using my limited Spanish, having a conversation, and then the daughter of the same woman and the brother of this baby came over and just gave me a hug around my waist, and that was beautiful in itself, but it wasn't so much that really caught my attention, but that one of the volunteers saw it all happen, and she kind of flashed a smile at me, and I saw that I think something like that could really be of so much importance to that volunteer, because you're witnessing humanity, and it's like that interaction is not the important part. It's the fact that for that volunteer, they might have had a change in mindset where they go back home and they're like, there's more meaning to human interactions and relationships between people. And that my life can be one filled with deeper meaning, with deeper connections. Because I think when you see these interactions between people who are seemingly so different, seemingly so disparate, that people that, live in very adverse conditions have meaningful connections, and people laugh over similar silly jokes, you realize, to your point, that I have one life, what do I want to fill it with? And I don't know, the humanity of the world becomes louder,
and more beautiful, right, and you realize that you want to be part of it, right. Well, I mean, it shouldn't be surprising to us, right? We're all human beings, and I think that that's how we're hardwired, right? Like, we're hardwired to serve one another and take care of each other, and we evolved in these tribes, and everything about sitting in a cubicle and scanning through some piece of glass goes against what we have been hardwired to be, right? And so I think that all of those things, man, are the values that MedLife can bring to somebody's life. You know what I mean? And again, it's not MedLife, right? And so I think this is another thing that I struggle to communicate to our staff. I struggle to communicate to other people. You come into MedLife and there's all these brands, right? There's Engaged Education, and there's Good Life Expeditions, and there's all this stuff. Well, it's because I'm not tied to this idea of a MedLife logo being the thing that we're talking about right now. I think the same thing that we're talking about, you can have on a trip to Machu Picchu if you have the intention to create some purpose out of that, right? If you go to, Cancun and want to sit on a beach and have a local Mexican person serve you drinks and never have any kind of real meaningful interaction, I suspect you're going to have some level of isolation, and you're not really going to get that feeling that we're talking about. If you have that same experience and you go to a different part of Mexico and really connect with people and the culture and the language and the food and really make meaningful connection, that same person and that same environment all of a sudden becomes rich and changes your life, and you feel fulfilled, right? And so I really believe tourism can be that, medicine can be that, sales can be that, marketing can be that. We can create environments where people have a sense of purpose and still say, hey, we got to pay bills at the end of the month. We still got to do the stuff to, make it meaningful, make it real. We're not talking about just handing out a bunch of Tylenol to somebody and somehow giving yourself a pat on the back. It's about true, meaningful purpose, you know? Yeah. And so I think that that's what I'm trying to kind of create in the world, right? Is different businesses, different opportunities for people to have that meaningful experience that creates a little bit of a kinder, softer, more loving world for more people. Sounds so, but really
but as you say,
why not create that?
But then still hold on to or be aware of the reality of having to pay bills and not letting those things be in conflict with one another.
Each other, yes. That's what I mean about the slight tilt. It's not about
sitting in a circle and singing
Totally, man. And that's what I mean about the slight tilt. I've been in some of those environments,
and actually they lose all their meaning. You know, people just want to basically, sign out of their own life.
Right. Totally.
Abdicate all their responsibility. Is you realize that if you don't have a really strong, good reason to get up in the morning, then life very quickly loses all of its beauty. You know?
there's some element, right, that like, I mean, some element of meaning and purpose comes from the suffering, right? And not really the suffering, that's the wrong way, because it somehow suggests that like people need to suffer to have meaning, but like through hard work, through effort, right? Through hard work and effort, which we all associate at some level with suffering sometimes.
But just about caring about something.
Yeah, sure.
Whatever it is.
But it's not something, it's something with a little bit of gumption, a little bit of push, a little bit of hard, right? Like it's not, I think the beautiful part of what MedLife's doing, you would lose if you did it in a very affluent area potentially, or some element of it, right?
Yeah.
Like part of the beauty is that there's some serious effort that goes into trying to pull this off, right? And I mean, that's probably part of this, like being a human being too, right? Is like by working hard, you have some sense of satisfaction from like accomplishing this thing. And that's kind of what you're saying, right? Is you can't forget that you got to pay bills and you got to do these things. And it's not about like ignoring the realities of life, right? It's totally on board with those, but just saying, you know, the realities of life doesn't mean that business has to screw everybody over. Mm-hmm. That's not real, right? And I think a lot of us kind of grew up with those things, right? Like sales screws people over. Businesses are just about just making money. That's the only thing that matters, right? And I think a lot of us push back against that. And a lot of us say like, why does it have to be that way? Like, why can't I be in business? Why can't I do sales? Why can't I be a physician? Have some purpose in my life, have some beauty in my life, work hard. Why does it have to be just like screwing everybody over? I don't think it has to be. Like, it's just, that's almost like the half cup, half empty type thing, right? It's just, I choose a life of meaning, purpose, and hard work rather than easy dopamine hits and no sense of purpose and just money.
Well, I think that's the trade-off, right? You either go for easy dopamine hits,
right?
Maybe scrolling on a screen or whatever it may be, or you go for that thing that seems like it might just be out of reach.
Yep.
And then when you achieve it, then you feel what it really feels like to succeed.
Yeah.
And you get maybe not a dopamine hit, but you get a dopamine hit that lasts a lot longer.
Sure.
And
a sense of connection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it adds meaning to your life. Yeah.
Yep. And I think the thing that we're getting deceived by with all the social media stuff is like, we think that jump is really big. And I think it's not. I really don't. I don't think the quick, easy dopamine hit to the meaning, like a life of meaning and purpose, is actually that far apart. But it feels like it when you're just in that sort of like just dopamine, doing your work 9 to 5, like struggling to kind of get through. Like it feels like it can be very far away.
Yeah.
But I to your point with the little girl that kind of gave you the hug today, it's literally that far away.
Right.
It's literally a human connection far away. It's not very far away, right? And it's
true that social media will tell you, if you want to change your life, that you have to
get off social media.
Crazy.
Yeah, right? Oh, true, totally, right? You got to go to the French Alps, you got to hike Mount Everest.
Sell all of your possessions.
Sure, totally. Yes.
And become...
Right. A monk, whatever.
or whatever it is.
Totally. And that's what I mean about the slight bend off from like my life. Like my life might seem crazy to people, but it's just a slight bend, man. I mean, I know a lot of people that are working in the same place that I work that just live in New York City or Seattle or whatever. I just happen to live in Lima, Peru and do this nonprofit stuff.
Yeah.
Like it's actually not that different from their lives.
Yeah.
There's just a slight bend towards purpose, meaning, making a difference.
But why do you think that feels so far away for people? Why is it that somehow your life might seem like this
crazy thing,
this big change?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably the way we grew up, right? Like for most of us, like I also didn't grow up in a way that this even seemed like a thing, right? It was, you were sort of born into a square and this is the way it is. And this is the kind of stuff you need to do. And this is the kind of career you are. And this is what you are. And you're kind of like given an identity, and it can be really hard to be like, well, what if I don't want that identity? Like, what if I want something else? And I think that was, if there was any strength that I had, I didn't have a fear to be like, well, this is what I want. You know what I mean? And I think I combined this is what I want with, I only have one life at this, right? And so that created a sense of urgency or kind of an activation energy to be like, then you should try and go get it, because you only got
time's
ticking. You don't have as much time as you think. I mean, man, I'm going to be 44 next month. I mean, like 20 years flies so fast. And
so like, you were 24 when you started MedLife?
I was, yeah, about that. Yeah, about that, 23, 24, something like that, yeah. And again, like now, sitting in this position and you seeing like a logo and a t-shirt and like a marketing team and like content creation and all this stuff, right? It sounds like, whoa, you started this huge thing when you were 24. No, like I started a club that I put some paper on a wall and was like, hey, I'm passionate about global health in Latin America. Does anybody want to go on this trip? I went on this really crappy medical mission. I think I can do it better. I was wrong. I did not do it better. And six all young women said, sure, we'll go on a trip with you. And like at the time, the big organizations were charging $1,200, similar to what we charge now. And that was 20 years ago. And I charged $500, you know what I mean, to go. So like, we literally got on public buses to go places. Like you were in Miraflores, yes, but we're on a public bus to Pamplona, like not a private chartered bus, right? Like we're carrying the bags of medicine with us. Like, I mean, like straight up, like bootstrapped the hell out of it, right? Like, so, I mean, here now, almost 44, looking back, it's like, whoa, you started this thing when you were 24? And it's like, no, like I started this really tiny thing, but I was stubborn enough not to stop for the last 20 years.
Right.
And to be honest, almost anything you do for 20 years is going to grow.
Sure.
Right? Like,
or if it doesn't, then it might be time to give up.
To be honest, man, I think that comes from a place of fear in you. That like, and all of us, that like, what if I fail? And my experience has been over the last 20 years failure is basically a myth. Like failure is kind of emotional exhaustion and giving up on that emotional exhaustion more than you not being able to find the solution. Like the reality is, if you go at something, whatever it is, for 20 years, every day you're trying to solve the bottleneck in that process, it may take you 3 months, it may take you 6 months, then you may fail for 6 months. But then in the 7th month, you succeed, and everybody's like, whoa, you succeeded. and you're just like, yeah, but I failed for like 6 months in a row. Like, nobody sees the failures, they just see the fact that you never stopped.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
And so what people are calling success is really just not stopping. Right? Like, if I quit tomorrow, and I told the world, like, I can't deal with this anymore. I'm too stressed out. Like, I can't raise my children in this way. Like, I can't do this anymore. They'd be like, Nick did this crazy thing and then failed. And if I just keep doing it until I die, they would be like, oh my God, he never failed. He just kept going. Like, you, at some element.
I like that. You're just really stubborn, basically.
Or I almost don't believe in failure anymore. Like, that's not to say that I don't fail. Like, I've had epic failures. Like, I start to cry if I start talking about it. But we lost some patience and stuff that's just feels like the world is crashing down on you. It's just like, I fucked up so big. Like, how did I screw this up, you know? And the only reason that wasn't like the defining failure that everyone sees is because I kept going. And so that there were wins after that. And so then everybody's like, yeah, well, you know, success takes failure or whatever. Like, but, you know, all these kind of
sure, it all becomes irrelevant as long as you keep
long as you just keep going.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's because it's all connected, and you can see the volunteers that come on and they're a little bit further along in life. And even like even just in this week, I've seen like there's so many different stages that people are in life, even between like 18 and 22 years old. And it's not just restricted to their age. It's mostly about the experiences they've had or the outlook they have. And you can see for some volunteers that the SLT will make such a difference in their lives just because they'll get to learn so much more about themselves. And about how they present as people, how they hold themselves, you know, and like,
what are you going to do when the world does this? Like, I think it's true. I really feel like every time I go into these situations in Pamplona or wherever, I regularly learn something about myself.
Yeah.
And for years felt like I was taking away more than I was giving. You know what I mean? Because I just learned so much about myself, you know? Kind of going back to this idea of like perception and stuff, like, and this may be triggering to some people that maybe have different beliefs, right? But like I've thought about this a lot recently, and I've had a conversation recently about, I mean, from my perspective as like a physician, right? I personally believe in evolution. Hopefully that's not something that is real controversial for people, but like, I think we all evolved in these tribes, right? And I think to myself, so like, what is the purpose of emotion, right? Like, if I believe that emotion came out of evolution, then it has some purpose, right? Rational thinking, I can make sense of that, right? So rational thinking, I'm like, you solve problems, right? Emotions, I'm like, I mean, I think what emotions evolved from is like all of us sitting in a tribe at night in some jungle and like not wanting to be literally eaten by like a lion or something, right? And so you have fears, you have anxieties.
Yeah.
You realize that if I'm in this tribe and if I walk out into the, you know, the darkness by myself, there's literally a threat to my life, right? And so we have this hardwired in us anxieties, fears of being isolated, fears of being called out, fears of being pushed out of the tribe and being hated by everybody, right? That are literally hardwired into you, that are being triggered all the time, every day, because that's how we evolved and literally survived millions of years ago, right? That are totally irrelevant now. It doesn't serve you at all.
Yeah,
right?
Or they're triggered by false
dangers.
False data, yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Like, there's no lion that's going to kill you.
Exactly.
You're at dinner with a bunch of other friends, right?
Yeah, and someone has made a comment that triggers that same emotional response as a lion coming to attack you.
Totally.
Part of the reason I was laughing so much is because my best friend in the world has these exact same thoughts and brings this theory into almost all conversations, even at parties where it's probably not
very helpful.
Yeah, and he constantly reverts back to, you know, the fact that we're basically slightly more evolved than cavemen. And yeah, he has this, you know, where he thinks about jealousy, and he really tries to think like, what was the need for jealousy in
society?
Why am I feeling this emotion?
I take it from a different angle. Like, I take it from, if I want to be a young person and I have goals, right? The rational part of my brain. I want to be a physician. I want to make a difference. I want to have purpose in my life. And yet I have all of these emotions of anxiety, of fear, of like not wanting to try, of what happens if I fail? Like, what will people say? Like, all this stuff. What if all that emotional drive of that whole conversation around fear is totally irrelevant to modern society? Like, the fear that you have of being pushed out of a tribe and like not surviving as a result doesn't exist anymore. Like, you can be pushed out of whatever tribe that exists now, school, friendship, work, whatever, you can still eat. Right? Like, it's no longer tied to your survival. So a lot of the emotions that we feel really have to be taken in stride, and like, you have to be able to say, is what I'm feeling right now productive towards where I want to go, right? And I think that there is some element there that I've been able to figure out in my own life in terms of having this life, right? So if I want to have a purpose-driven life and live in Lima, Peru, and as you said, sort of do these things that other people feel like are crazy or wild or whatever, right? If I start to feel those fears, but I can sort of rationalize that fear is not real. It's just something that my brain is producing and I'm feeling, but is not actually evidence that I'm in danger. And I just need to be aware of the feeling, but not act on it, right? So I don't believe that I have to act on every feeling that I have, whether it's depression, anxiety. I may feel those things, but that doesn't mean I have to change what I do as a result. I can still work out. I can still create purpose. I can still do med life and feel anxious or feel fearful or feel depressed. And my experience has been, when you do feel those things and you do those things that we're talking about anyway, those things fade away.
Yeah.
Right? So like, the way to treat those things, those feelings, are not to get hyper focused on them and be like, why do I feel this? Why do I feel this? Why do I feel this? Doesn't really matter why you feel this. You do. Go on. Yeah. And it fades away, right?
Yeah.
And
this has been a big thing I've realized recently, because I had like a knee pain, I had a stomach problem recently, I have back pain, and they've been like, I've had a few problems over the last 4 months, that have all lasted for around a period of 3 weeks. Sure. And I found that they came and then they went away. And in the past, I might have really lent into those problems and been like, when is this problem going to go away? Yeah.
Like, you try to find the meaning in the suffering, right?
How can I fix it? Yeah, why is this happening to me just before I'm about to move to Peru or something? Like, really build this story around my, like, really exacerbate the meaning behind my suffering.
Yes.
And then I realized, like, yeah, the problems will just go away.
Yeah.
You know, they're not nearly as big as I'm trying to make them. And there's again, maybe a bit philosophical, but there's this great quote in this, or this story in this book, about this guy that turns up to somebody's house, this other man's house, and says, here is a baby. And the man takes the baby and doesn't say anything, just looks after the baby for a few days. And a few days later, the same person shows up and takes the baby away and goes off. And it explains how at each stage in that experience, that person could react and create a whole story around why that's happening to them. But basically through non-reaction, they've limited their suffering to such a massive extent. So when that person first showed up at the house, they could say, hey, what are you doing here? And when they try and force the baby upon him, he could say, that's not my baby, yada, yada, yada. And when, you know, they then come to take the baby away, he could say, hey, now it's my baby. And there could be all this attachment there. And instead, by just non-reaction, he's kind of eliminated all that suffering. And obviously this is a bit of a silly situation.
It's not, though. It's not.
What it's really about is just, very cliche, but going with the flow. And basically just accepting that whatever comes to you, and accepting what leaves you as well. You know?
I mean, I think another way of saying that is just like, everything you feel doesn't necessarily have meaning. Right? Like, because you are happy, that doesn't mean that this thing is the right thing for you, right? Because you are suffering doesn't mean that that's the wrong thing for you, right? Because you had a bad day and you feel depressed or anxious doesn't mean you need to change your life. If you want to change your life, cool. If that gives you fuel to do it, go for it. You know what I mean? But you don't have to make meaning out of everything you feel, right? And I think that, I mean, as we talk more about this, like, in my life, I've had very clear that I want to have a sense of purpose and meaning, right? I've had a sense that I don't have very long to do that. My life is short and I get one. And so what happens to me, or like unfortunate things or suffering, I can just endure so that I can have the life that I want, if that makes sense, right? Like, and this is a totally random thing, and again, I don't know if this is going to be helpful to anybody or not, but like, there's a young physician that I work with who's recently started, and I said in the emergency room, like, you know, in the emergency room, there's like these crazy quotes about how often an emergency room doctor is interrupted with what they're doing because they're just constantly trying to manage all this chaos. And kind of what I said is like, when the chaos happens, you can either react to it, you can get frustrated, you can say, why is this happening? Like, why doesn't it work this way? Or you can just deal with the problem. Right? And if you just constantly are in a state of, I'm just going to deal with the problem that I have to face, and I'm not going to put meaning to it, I'm not going to get angry about it, I'm not going to say, why is it this way? It just is this way, right? If you don't want to go back again afterwards, then don't. You know what I mean? But if you can limit the ability of building up this whole story of this, that, somebody hurting me, like all of this stuff in our minds, and just focus on the fact that you have to solve the problem, all of a sudden, the energy you needed to solve the problem is way less than the energy you needed to deal with all the emotions that you built around dealing with the problem. And guess what? If you have to deal with the emotions, you still have to deal with the problem, right? So it's not like the problem went away. You just have to deal with the problem and all the emotions that you created in that process, right? And so I think, you know...
you get a bill at the door that you weren't expecting, and you spend an hour and a half complaining to your best friend or your wife or your sister about the bill, and
you still have the bill.
And you haven't become
you feel miserable.
Anywhere closer to actually paying the bill.
Totally. Totally, right? So like you impose your own suffering. Much. And I guess trying to wrap this back into like medlife, right? Like, I think all of this is to say, like, you're how far you are to the life that you want of, purpose, service, having some meaning in your life is not as far as you think it is, right? And a lot of the emotions that you feel that are preventing you of going in that path, I'm sorry to say, are probably not as meaningful as you think they are.
Yeah.
Right? And if you just focus on what your goal is and say, listen, I can still try and work towards my goal even though I feel fear. I can still work towards my goal even though I'm anxious or I'm depressed or I feel sad. My experience has been, if you just stick with it, eventually those things tend to fade. Not to say that they don't come back 6 months or 18 months or 2 years later. That happens. Life is hard, you know. But I haven't made a lot of progress in my life by over focusing on that feeling because I'm still not where I want to be.
Yeah.
Right? Like, focus on where you want to be and how to get there, and recognize that these feelings are going to come from time to time, and you got to deal with that.
Yeah.
You know?
I remember after COVID, I was working with people with disabilities, and that was a job I took because I needed a job and I needed to make money. And I remember thinking, oh, I would love to work for the UN, or I would love to work with prisoners, or like I really wanted to do something so meaningful. And I spent quite a lot. I did end up really enjoying the job working with people with disabilities, but I spent a lot of time just thinking about the future and thinking that I need to be doing something better. I need to be further ahead than where I am now.
Yeah.
And then when I finished the job at the working with people with disabilities, I ended up getting like my dream job working with prisoners, and that came out of nowhere, you know?
Yeah.
And it would be so easy to kind of just, it is so easy to just remain in that place of I don't have what I need right now.
Yeah.
Instead of just being really grateful for what you do have and seeing where you are now as half of the puzzle for where you're going to be.
Totally. Yeah. Right. I mean, that, and what sort of has come to my mind is like, that's that whole failure thing, right? So where does failure even fit into this? Like, it's not even relevant. You know what I mean? So develop some gratitude. So be thankful for the things that you have, and like focus on those things. And yeah, you may fail at some things, but if the next day you get back up and you continue doing it, then it was totally irrelevant.
Yeah.
You know, and so all of the emotional stress that you felt about this idea of failing at something melts away.
Or not even just relevant, but extremely beneficial, right? Because when you fail, you learn twice fold in what you put in. And
so failure is just then a lesson, right?
It's if anything, fail as often, I mean, again, it's cliche, but fail as often as possible.
Sure. Yeah. Or, I mean, just don't build up so much meaning to the failure. Like, I don't know that I would go as far to say that I fail as often as possible, because it does hurt sometimes, and it is painful sometimes, you know? But it
how's your last 6 months been, Nick? I've really pursued failure
every single day. Right. But you don't have to assign as big of a meaning to it, right? Like, it's just, it was a lesson, okay, move on.
Yeah.
So, right, we have this Instagram post that I sent the guys that I forget the name of the actor, right? But it's like basically talking about the purpose of art, right? And that, you know,
I think this was the one you were showing me.
Totally. Right? Yes. Yeah. And so it's like saying, like, you know, everybody feels like art is kind of this, you know, just extraneous, like, you know, lovey-dovey, whatever type thing. And then all of a sudden you find yourself in love, or someone dies, and you have these, you know, incredibly deep, strong emotions. And you're like, has anyone ever felt this level of pain? And it's art and it's music that helps you make sense of that pain and get through it, right? And then all of a sudden you realize that art is this essential thing to life that we all need during those moments, right? And I've thought the reason that captured my mind is because I think that in this world of med life where we talk about, you know, kids getting into med school or building your resume or this or that, there's this like very transactional sense of like service, right? Like, I do service because I'm going to improve my resume and then get into med school, right? But what if all of the meaning in life comes from service? Right? Like, literally everything that ever gave you any pleasure was, at least in my life, and I can't say for other people, but like had other people involved, Do you know what I mean?
Mm.
And it was through that, you know, maybe it's, you also say it's just like friendship, right? And many of the relationships that I have in MedLife may seem crazy to people, but I consider them close friends. You know what I mean? Like Ricardo Cassani is somebody that I really look up to in life. You know what I mean? Like the man is, he is a baller, like in just so many ways. Carlos Benavides is like a badass, right? He really is. Like he has achieved things that I hope that I can achieve with so far fewer resources. You know what I mean? And so there's some element of this thing where, like, to Luis's point, that like when you serve people, like you are a human being, like you are joining humanity, like you're creating purpose and meaning in your life. And like, I don't know, I'm not going to try and compare or contrast with like love or art, right? But I just know in my own life, like this idea of service is really important. You know what I mean? And it has created so much meaning for me, you know? And at a similar level to music or art or love, like it has been really important in my life, you know? And I hesitate to say other people because I don't want to try and tell other people what's important to their lives, but I have this suspicion that that's the case for most of us. For most of us, when we can really serve people and really do it in a meaningful way, like we get a really deep sense of connection, we get a really deep sense of purpose and like meaning in our lives, right? Similar to like art, love, things like that. You know what I mean?
I think especially if you're not expecting anything in return, because you mentioned earlier about this underlying
transactional, right,
egoic kind of quality that can sometimes creep into our lives. And I think when you really serve without expecting anything back, that's when it's really powerful.
Sure.
And that's also why, right, like doing I mean, I know Luis, like you said, you're really passionate about your job as a filmmaker, and you were saying, you know, about people going to work and just feeling a bit drained and not getting anything back. I think I've lost my train of thought.
No, it's totally that same sense of service, right, that we bring to like Pamplona, that if you can have this towards Luis, David, or you and I can have, all of a sudden your job has some more meaning, right? And you feel like you have purpose in your job again, right? And it's not just making money or just advertising, right? Like, because it is a tool that it makes the world a better place for you. You know what I mean? And all of a sudden you derive purpose and meaning from that. You know what I mean? That, man, this conversation is what MedLife is to me, right? Like, it's not, that's why I say like things like MedLife is just a tool. It's just a logo. It's just a name. It's just it's a legal entity that ultimately lets us have this conversation, right? Like, I don't care if you call it Good Life Expeditions or Engaged Education or MedLife or what, like that is irrelevant to me, really, right?
Right.
I think
it's like that existence created the opportunity for this to take place, that it created
this was always going to take place in my life. It just facilitated me to do it almost in a profession.
Oh, I meant this conversation. But
I think this conversation was going to happen regardless if we had crossed paths in London or here, right? But MedLife facilitates it in an easier way.
Right.
Right? Like the chances that you and I would have crossed paths in London probably pretty rare. But MedLife was like the calling card that brought us together and we had the conversation. I mean, it's the same reason that David came to MedLife, because he got burned out in like, you know, selling crappy products to people in higher education. Or maybe Luis was like, I'm tired of doing advertising for BS stuff.
Yeah.
People are all seeking some sense of meaning and purpose that comes from serving one another, right? And so this always was going to happen. We were just tired of doing it for people that didn't care, right? And so we were going to find each other in some way. MedLife was just the formal way of doing it, right? And so I think that same thing with all these kids, right? The desire that we have to meet this need, to serve one another, to create purpose, to do something of meaning in life, we all had this regardless of if MedLife ever existed.
Right, like the volunteers and the students going on these SLTs are going to satisfy their need for connection through some avenue. And MedLife just happens to be the one
in our lives right now that's filling that. But realistically, will it be in 200 years? Probably not.
Definitely.
500 years? Probably not, right? Like we probably won't exist. It probably won't exist in 1,000 years, right? Medlife, right? And so it's just, I think it's all of us recognizing, I mean, coming back to Luis's idea of just like, the purpose of my life is just to serve my life and to exist and to survive isn't enough for any of us. We don't want to have a life where the only meaning in my life is that I survived.
Sure. Right? It's a pretty low benchmark.
It's a low, right, it is. But when you're just doing the 9 to 5 and you're just selling products you don't care about, or you're selling higher education, and you feel like, what the hell am I doing with my life? That's what it feels like you're doing.
Yeah.
You feel like you're just surviving. You're just cutting a paycheck. You're paying off your student debt. You're buying food to survive, but like there's no deeper sense of like doing anything meaningful, right? And I think that's what we're all looking for, right? And so that's kind of coming back to the start of the conversation of like, I don't care if you're in sales or, you know, medicine or law, just take a slight tilt towards serving one another.
Yeah.
And I think the world, my world became better for me when I did that.
Yeah.
I can't tell you for your life because it's your life and I don't know your life, right? But my life became better when I decided that I would serve other human beings.
Yeah. I asked you earlier what are the reasons behind why people think that this is maybe a different life or why they feel that bend towards doing something meaningful feels quite drastic. Mm-hmm. And I think you're right that it is the way society is set up.
Yeah.
I was living in India in part of a community that has a solar powered kitchen, and there's 40 different farms in eastern India, and there's like woodworking workshops and meditation and yoga and all this kind of stuff. And I called my friend in London and I was telling him about this kind of stuff, and he said, oh, it sounds like those are people that are really lost, or it sounds like it must be filled with people that are really that aren't contributing to society, you know, like, are they making any money, or are they paying taxes, this kind of stuff.
Sure.
And I said to him, so is a bachelor living in London in a high-rise apartment who's
drinking on the weekend, just partying, right?
Yeah, working in banking or whatever it may be, who lives alone, and I think this is a big aspect. I said, who lives alone in a one-bedroom apartment, is he contributing more to society than the people I've just mentioned? Right. And he kind of let out this big laugh, and he was like, yeah, you know, you're right. Like, I know what I'm saying is complete rubbish.
Sure.
Obviously, that those people are providing more value. Sure. And it's just that initial thought we have is so cemented in money or job titles or these traditional ideas of success.
Sure.
You know, but and that's again to come back to that whole idea of what is failure or does it exist. It's like, if you create the own parameters to determine your success, then
you can't
fail.
Right.
And you may as well make those parameters something beautiful, like the depth and quality of your connections, the influence you have in the world, the power to create change. You may as well make it those things over something really qualitative, like the numbers in your bank account.
Sure. And I think another thing I think we do in modern society is we polarize things, right? Into like yes or no, right? Like that's the way our language works, right? Or like 1 or 0, right? And so like the example you used was like this, like, you know, like commune in like India and like the iBanker in London, right?
Right, yeah.
The reality is there's thousands of shades in between that.
Yeah.
And I truly believe that the iBanker can make the world a better place.
Yeah.
With just the slight bend towards caring for people, right? And like maybe the iBanker's looking at a project that's like, wow, this is going to totally screw over this community. I'm not going to do that one. I'm going to do this one, right?
Yeah.
And I think you see that more and more, is that like big business is realizing that human beings want that slight bend towards meaning and saying that's actually more profitable. Yeah. Like we can actually make more money. And so all of a sudden, like, I don't think the paradigm of this or that is even true. And I hope a lot of people like embrace a career in sales, but one that produces meaning and purpose in their lives rather than just the money. right? So like there's elements there that I totally jive with what you're saying, but I don't think you have to leave your iBanking job, and I hope you don't, because the world's going to be a really great place if the iBankers decide to take a slight bend towards purpose and meaning and making the world a better place, because they have a lot of influence in the world. Yeah. Right?
Yeah. And the way that I've perceived this job, you're right with like, you know, this is a sales role. Or the reason why I want to work at MedLife and what this role means to me is the opportunity to create more opportunities for other people.
Yeah.
You know, the harder I work at my job, the more often I choose hard.
Yep.
The more opportunities I have to provide somebody with that new experience, or let something fruitful develop for that person.
Yeah. I mean, that's super interesting to me too, right? Like, if you think about, so I make this decision when I'm 24, you make this decision at how old are you?
26.
26. The cascading and ripple effects that you just said of other people making a slightly different decision because of that decision you've now made, right? That really does change the world, right? All of a sudden, like, the decisions that I made at 24, you're now sitting here, right? The decisions that I made at 24, somebody's serving somebody in, right? And so, like, that slight bend towards purpose and meaning and doing, like, a life where you're helping and serving other people, all of a sudden, like you say, opens the doors for all these other people to do the same exact thing. And all of a sudden, we are creating a different society.
Yeah.
You know, which is nice.
And these kinds of conversations can bend my mind sometimes. Because if you think about it too deeply, then you really start.
Then all of a sudden it disappears, and you're like, whoa.
Well, no, but you just realize, like, okay, if I honestly, it's the whole butterfly effect, right? But it's like if I literally. Yeah, again, you can go way too deep into it, but with a pinch of salt, you can say, if I help that person in front of me, if I open the door for that person, if I, you know, just ask that person how they're doing, in that moment, that could change that person's life to such a significant extent, and you just never realize it.
Yeah, you don't. Yeah. And that, I think at some level, right, this can come back to, like, overwhelming sense of pressure for people too, right? Like, I always have to be on. I always have to serve. Like, if I'm having a bad day, then did I just screw up the entire world, right? Or something like that, right? And I think that there's an element of grace that we all have to have, and just be like, I'm not as important as I think, right? And, like, it's okay if I have a bad day, right? And, like, that you know, you don't have to get it right every time. You don't have to do the righteous thing, the right thing, the meaningful thing. Like, it's okay if you have a Sunday and you just need to play video games to reset your brain or do whatever you do, you know? Like, that's fine, you know? But I think the big picture is just, like, I think we are all attracted in doing more things that create a sense of connection and service and meaning in our lives. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And MedLife is this one little tiny thing. But I really hope that, like, we, as a MedLife community, can spin that into other things, right? I mean, imagine there's, like, big tourism companies in Peru, right? Imagine all the stuff that we've talked about kind of being boiled down into, like, the values of how a tourism company is going to operate 60,000 tourists in Machu Picchu every year, right? All of a sudden, the world becomes slightly different, right? If you're going to do, you know, a clothing factory, like, suddenly slightly different, right? Like, there's all these ways that, like, you can slightly make things a little bit better. And I mean, again, getting real philosophical about this, but, like, that's kind of what human society has done, right? Like, like, over a long period of time, we just make these little improvements each time.
Tiny iterations.
Tiny iterations, right? And maybe, I think a little bit that's where we are, right? Like, we're in an iteration where people don't want to just make money anymore. They want to make money, be able to pay for the bills, and have a sense of purpose.
Yeah.
Right? Like, not as crazy as we thought, or our parents maybe thought, or whomever, I don't know. You know, our grandparents, you know, who maybe thought that was impossible. Yeah. Interesting conversation, guys.